What is learned from the reading and videos? So first of all, the first chapter, globalization. In this chapter, I learned that by studying international business, it helps with individual and organizational performance. Also, it can help with making non-business decisions, such as where to go for future jobs. The connection between international business and globalization is that the global connections between supplies and markets are the results from international business activities. The force driving globalization and international business are the rise in application of technology, the advancement on communication and transportation, liberalization of cross-border trade and resource movement, services that support international business, growth in consumer pressures, increase in global competition, changes in political situations, and government policies, expansion of cross-national cooperation. Some criticisms of globalization. Threats towards national sovereignty, such as questions about local objectives and policies, small economies' overdependence, cultural homogeneity, environmental stress by arguments that growth in production and international travels increases the consumption on non-renewable natural resources. Also, arguments on the effect of globalization on conserving natural resources. Growing income and inequality and personal stress. Critics claim that globalization further increases inequality. Also, some repercussions of globalization can be only measured in economical terms. Why companies engage in international business? So it's for sales expansion, seek for products, services, and resources, risk reduction, international business operating modes, merchandise exports and imports, service exports and imports, tourism and transportation, service performance, and asset use. External environments that might affect how they may best operate abroad. So there are geographic influence, demographic influence, political policies, legal policies, behavior factors, economic forces, competitive product strategy, company resources and experiences, competitors faced in each market. Next, in the Blanchard chapter 2 to 7. So first, chapter 2, GDP, which is gross domestic product, is the total output in the national incomes accounts. It can be thought about in two ways. One, GDP is the final goods and services produced in a given period of time. Two, GDP is the sum of value added in the economy during a given period of time. Nominal GDP is the sum of the number of final goods that's been produced times the current price of the product. Real GDP is the measure of output. Unemployment is when a person doesn't have a job and that's looking for a job. Labor force is the sum of employed people and unemployed people. Unemployment rate is calculated as the number of unemployment divided by labor force. Economists care about unemployment rate because it can represent human cost and shows how efficiently the economy is using its resources. Inflation is the increase in the general price. Inflation rate is the rate of the increase in price. Economists looks at two different measures of the price level. One, GDP deflator, which is the average price of the goods produced in the economy. Two, consumer price index, which is the average price of goods consumed in the economy. Relations between output and unemployment and inflation. There's the Okun's law, which is relation between output growth and the change in unemployment. So it is about high output growth typically leads to a decrease in the unemployment rate. There's the Phillips curves, relationship between unemployment and inflation. It suggests that low unemployment rate leads to an increase in inflation rate. Finally, macroeconomists distinguish between short run, medium run, and the long run. In chapter 3, GDP is calculated as consumption plus investment plus government spending plus inventory investment plus exports minus imports. Consumption is the goods and services that's been purchased by consumers. Investment equals non-residential investment minus the purchase of new plants and new machines by firms minus residential investment minus purchase of new houses or apartments. Government spending is the purchase of goods and services by the federal, state, and local government. Exports are goods and services that are bought by foreigners. Imports are goods and services bought in foreign countries. Production depends on the demand, and demand depends on income. An increase in the consumer spending output does not directly change to a new equilibrium. They have to increase little by little. Chapter 4. There are two types of money. 1, currency. 2, checkable deposits. Bonds pays a positive interest rate but can't be used for transactions. The proportion of bonds that someone needs to keep depends on the level of transactions and the interest rate of the bond. The amount of money that a person wants to hold is the demand for money. It is the sum of all the individual demands for money of the people in the economy. An increase in the nominal income will increase the interest rate, which will increase the demand for money. An increase in the supply of money, it will decrease the interest rate and will increase the demand for money. Expansionary open market is when the central bank increases the supply of money. If a central bank wants to increase the supply of money in the economy, they wouldn't buy bonds. By buying bonds, it will increase the price of the bond and the interest rate will decrease. Contractionary open market is when the central bank decreases the supply of money. The interest rate in the economy is determined by 1, the demand for the central bank money equals the demand for currency by people plus demand for reserves by bank. 2, the supply of central bank money is under the direct control of the central bank. 3, the equilibrium is when the demand and supply are equal. When people can hold both currency and checkable deposits, the demand for money involves 2 decisions. 1, how much money they want to hold, and 2, how much money to hold in currency and how much to hold in checkable deposits. People will hold more money if the transaction level is high and that the interest rate on bonds is low. Chapter 5. From the equation shown in the book, investments depends on production and the interest rate. An increase in production will lead to an increase in investment. An increase in the interest rate will lead to a decrease in investment. The ICE curve shows that an increase in the interest rate will lead to a decrease in investment. This decrease in investment will lead to a decrease in output, which will continue to decrease consumption and investment. A fiscal contraction, an increase in taxes, in government spending, and consumer confidence will lead to a decrease in outputs, which shifts the ICE curve to the left. The other way around, a fiscal expansion, anything that causes an increase in the equilibrium level of output, will cause the ICE curve to shift to the right. The LM curve shows that an increase in income leads to an increase in the demand for money. It will then increase the equilibrium interest rate. Monetary expansion. An increase in the money supply leads to an increase in output, which leads to a decrease in the interest rate. On the other way around, a monetary contraction leads to a decrease in output and an increase in interest rate. When putting the IS and LM curve together, the supply of goods needs to be equal to the demand of goods and supply of money needs to be equal to the demand for the money. With these two curves together, it will help determine both the output and interest rate. Chapter 6. The civilian labor force is the sum of working people or those who are looking for a job. Out of the labor force are those who are neither working in the marketplace nor looking for work. The participation rate is the ratio of the labor force to non-institutional civilian population. The unemployment rate is the ratio of those unemployed to the labor force. Higher unemployment is associated with a lower chance of finding a job and a higher chance of losing their job. Workers have some bargaining power, which it can help with obtaining a higher wage. How much bargaining power of a worker has depends on how costly it is to replace the worker and how hard it is for the worker to find another job. Workers can gain a higher wage because firms choose to do so. They think that by giving a higher pay, it will help with being more productive. This link between productivity and wage is called the efficiency wage theory. If the expected price level increases, then the nominal wage will increase in the same proportion. An increase in unemployment will lead to a decrease in the nominal wage. The equilibrium in the labor market is when the real wage that is chosen in the wage setting is equal to the real wage that is implied by the price setting. This equilibrium also helps determine the natural rate of unemployment. Finally, Chapter 7. The aggregate supply relation shows the effect that the output can have on the price level. An increase in the output will cause an increase in employment. This increase in employment will lead to a decrease in unemployment and the unemployment rate. Then the nominal wage will increase, which will lead to a higher price level. Aggregate demand relation shows the effect of the price level on the output. An increase in the price level, it will decrease the real money stock, which will cause an increase in interest rate and finally decreasing the output. In the short run, there is no reason that output needed to be equal to the natural level of output. Variables that would be put into the aggregate supply or aggregate demand relation would lead to an output change and a change in the price level. In the medium run, output would be equal to the natural level of output in the end. In order to reach this outcome, adjustments would be needed, and it is to change the price level. A monetary expansion in the short run would lead to an increase in the real money stock and increasing the output. Over time, adjustment of price level expectations come, with the output being higher than the natural level of output, the price level higher than expectation. There will be a revise of the expectations and causing the aggregate supply curve to shift up. This adjustment would stop until the output returns to the natural level of output. In the medium run, monetary expansion has no effect on the output. Budget deficit in the short run lead to a decrease in output and can lead to a decrease in investment. In the medium run, with time, the output returns back to the natural level of output and the interest rate is lower, which leads to an increase in investment. An increase in the oil price in the short run leads to a decrease in output and increases the price level. But over time, the output will continue to decrease, which will continue to increase the price level. In the medium run, it will decrease the wage, increase unemployment, and then decrease the natural level of output. Next, the Krugman, chapter 14 to 16. So for 14, exchange rate is important in international trade because it allows us to compare prices of goods and services from different countries. Exchange rates allows individuals to compare domestic and foreign prices, which the demands of the goods and services is influenced by the relative prices. An increase of a country's currency would increase the relative price of its exports, which decreases the relative price of its imports. A decrease of a country's currency will have a opposite effect. The foreign exchange market is where the international currency trade takes place. The actors in this market are the commercial bank, corporations, non-bank financial institutions, and the central banks. The characteristics of the foreign exchange market are that the exchange takes place in financial centers, with big amounts of trade occurring. The major foreign exchange trading centers are connected by telephone, fax, and internet. There shouldn't be a significant difference in the exchange rate between different trading centers. Most transactions are exchanges of foreign currencies for US dollars. The demand for foreign currency assets depends on the asset returns, where it is the percentage increase it offers over time. Also, the real state of return is going to be looked at, which is the rate of return where has been computed by measured asset values in terms of a broad represented basket. Savers care about two characteristics of an asset other than the returns. They care about the risk and liquidity. The risk is that an asset's real return can turn out to be different from what's expected. Liquidity is that assets changes according to the cost and speed that savers dispose of them. When the foreign exchange market is in the equilibrium, this means that market participants are willingly holding the existing supplies of all the currencies. Interest parity, the basic equilibrium condition. The interest parity condition is when the expected returns on deposits of any two currencies are equal, on the condition that the currencies are calculated in the same currency. Chapter 15. Money is important as a medium of exchange, a unit of account, as a store of value. Although holding money is risky, but households and firms hold money because of its liquidity. Factors that determine the aggregate money demand are the interest rate, price level, and real national income. The money market is in the equilibrium when the money supply is equal to the aggregate money demand. The market is always moving towards an interest rate at the equilibrium. But if there is an excess of money supply, the interest rate will decrease. But if there's an excess in the demand for money, then interest rate will increase. An increase in a country's money supply, it will decrease the country's currency in the foreign exchange market. But as the money supply decreases, it will have an opposite effect. A permanent increase in the money supply will cause a long-run proportional decrease of its currency in the foreign exchange market. If a permanent decrease in the money supply will cause a long-run proportional increase of its currency in the foreign exchange market. A change in the money supply will cause demand and cost pressures, and the sources of these pressures comes from excess demands of output and labor, inflationary expectations, raw materials prices. An increase in the money supply can make the exchange rate to overshoot its long-run level in the short run. Chapter 16. Law of one price states that in a competition market, not counting the transportation costs and official barriers of trade, the same goods from different countries need to be sold at the same price when looking with the same currency. The theory of purchasing power parity states that the exchange rate between two countries' currencies is equal to the ratio of the country's price level. When goods and services temporarily becomes more expensive in one country more than another, the demand for the currency and its product decreases, leading the exchange rate and domestic price back in line with the PPP. Relative PPP translate absolute PPP from a statement about price and exchange rate level into about price and exchange rate changes. The monetary approach to the exchange rate uses PPP to explain how exchange rates and monetary factors interact in the long run. The monetary approach makes different specific predictions on the long-run effect on the exchange rate of changes in the money supply, interest rate, and output level. A rise in a country's expected inflation rate will cause an equal rise in interest rate. A decrease in the expected inflation rate will lead to a fall in the interest rate. This is called the Fisher effect. PPP theory does a really bad job in explaining the actual data on exchange rate and national price levels. The reason for this bad explanation is because trade barriers and non-tradables, departures from pre-competition, differences in consumption patterns, and price level measurements. Changes in the long-run exchange rate changes the long-run nominal exchange rate. The most important determinants of long-run swings in the nominal exchange rate are a shift in relative money supply levels, a shift in relative money supply growth rate, a change in relative output demand, a change in relative output supply. Now, the last reading, deglobalization in the context of United States and China decoupling. From this, I learned that first of all about deglobalization is the act to decrease interdependence and integration with others. In particular, it happens by reducing trade, investment, technology, or movement of people. And decoupling is the reduction to economic linkage between two specific economies, which decrease their interdependence. And the world is arriving at a trend of deglobalization or slower globalization. From the video. So first of all, from the videos, I learned the positives of globalization. Globalization has caused fewer people to live in extreme poverty. Consumers can access to more goods and services at a lower price than before. New technology and platforms causing easier social and cultural interactions and having access to new types of services. The negatives of globalization is benefits are being unequally shared, job losses has been more widespread, labor markets struggling to adapt to structural transitions, financialization of the economy and market concentration have caused income and wealth inequality. There is the dark economy, such as tax avoidance, organized crime, and financing of terrorism, corruption, and illicit financial flows destroys confidence in the global system. So policymakers are struggling to balance the needs between the global and local. With the world's uneven, fragmented response worsen the pandemic effects. So there should be better policies is needed to push the benefits of globalization and fight the root of inequality. And greatest threats governments need to be solved are global, but cannot be solved just by borders. We need a resilient and just economic system to strive the economy to be interconnected. With this connection, we can work together to solve global issues that are important. The most affected evidence of deglobalization would be the politics of both democracies and authoritarian states. Deglobalization is not entirely bad because there are issues that are better handled domestically. But deglobalization will not solve these issues. Stopping trade and only producing and selling locally would increase the price of all the goods and services. Fragmentation describes a world that could be divided into economic blocks, and members of the blocks would only do business with each other. This would fracture the flow of capital, goods, services, ideas, and so on. So war affecting the global finance. The war has caused economic shockwaves, and the global financial system is not immune. So, for example, Russian stock has lost over 40% because of fears of war, but after recovery, it was still at 20%. Global equity market has dropped up to 10%, but they have recovered recently. Emerging markets are in the difficult situation because of higher financial costs and greater risks of investors moving capital out. Emerging markets with low credit ratings have delayed new borrowing, and small businesses struggle with supply shortages, higher energy costs, and rising labor costs. And why greener economies? So in the future, almost 4 billion people will live in areas experiencing severe water stress. Higher population countries such as India and China will need 80% more energy, mostly coming from fossil fuel. Greenhouse gas stations would more than double in rapidly growing areas. In other countries would increase globally over 50%, pushing the earth temperature to increase. Farming, sprawling cities, logging, climate change can decrease the biodiversity by 10%. And early death will be primarily caused by pollution. So in order to be sustainable, renewables is very good. We need as much as possible. We also need zero carbon energy or net greenhouse gas. Negative ways of having energy system. Although they are controversial about nuclear energy, but it will play an important role in the future. Also, we need forms of bioenergies that will lead to negative emissions. There are not a lot of nuclear power. It is not because of technical problems, but more of a political problems. There are countries where there are anti-nuclear movements due to nuclear accidents, which scared the people. All humanity energy needs can be solved by solar panels, but there's still a lot of work for it to be more efficient, such as working on storing the energy and the transmission and distribution losses. Biofuels is limited and not recommended. Electric cars is recommended to be used, but in big countries such as China, it wouldn't help that much. It's only a small part. Heating and air conditioner can be more energy efficient, but it's more important to make more efficient buildings than working on efficient heating or air conditioning, because by having a proper efficient building, it means having a triple glazed window, for example, in the winter, which would lead to less heating need. And that is all. Thank you.